The Groom Wore Clearasil is the fourth episode of the fourth season of Cheers. This is, of course, directed by the brilliant James Burrows, and there will be spoilers as I go through various aspects of the narrative. This is a really fun episode. There are a lot of things going on here, and a couple of, well, actually, quite a few really funny moments. So, in general, my thoughts are going to be chronological, and it starts off with Woody receiving a letter from his dog, and it is absolutely adorable. It's very much a Woody thing. In fact, Woody is very Woody in this episode. There are some episodes where his personality is maybe not on the surface, but here pretty much everything he says and does is very typical of Woody, and I love that. It's definitely really introducing us to his personality over the last few episodes and really cementing the idea that he's got a very joyful personality, and I absolutely love the character. We then learn that Diane is actually going for an interview at the college for a part time teaching assistant job. I like the fact that they specified it was part time because that indicated that even if she got the job, she wouldn't necessarily be leaving Cheers and still be working at the bar. The way this played out was very, very entertaining because the interview goes perfectly. It seems like she's going to get this job. And then she finds out that Sumner Sloan, actually gave her a recommendation, and she begins to panic because she thinks the recommendation implied that she was willing to do sexual favors or have some kind of inappropriate relationship with the professor. And she keeps coming back into the room. And we have this great performance from Shelley Long, very, very well written, and she just keeps saying so many inappropriate things. And when she said she wasn't calling him flabby, I laughed out loud, and from that moment on, it just went from bad to worse for Diane, and it just went better and better for me as a viewer. It's a shame things didn't go in Diane's favour, but it certainly was very interesting. We also have a narrative focusing on Cliff, and there's a quote, and I'll share the quote in a moment, that just it's beautiful. It's just one sentence, but it's just so unexpected and something you would never expect expect to hear in real life. I'll share it in a moment, but Cliff finds a potato and he brings this into Cheers full of pride because he thinks it looks like Nixon, and he displays this potato, and at one point he puts it on a plinth or a soapbox in a suit that he says he got from a Ken doll, and nobody else is seeing this potato looking like Nixon. Woody had a very Woody reaction to the fact that the potato was wearing, if I remember, a blue suit with a brown tie, which is apparently not a thing you should do, but nobody is finding this potato amusing for the reasons that Cliff is. And he phones up the newspaper, and look at the faces on the extras behind Cliff, behind John Ratzenberger when he's on the phone. It's so funny. And just before he hangs up the phone, he says, and I quote, "I'll call you back when my potato marries a rock star." Never ever did I think I'd hear those words in that order in the same sentence. It's just fantastic. It's so brief, but very, very funny. I know I said my thoughts would be mostly chronological, but I'm actually jumping around a little bit, and I will now get to the part of the narrative that focuses on the title, and this is the fact that Carla's son Anthony, every other character calls him Anthony except Carla, who calls him Anthony. And I don't know why, but it really irritates me. But Anthony, or Anthony, is in love with his girlfriend Annie, and he wants to get married. Carla is not having this. And Sam ends up giving him a bit of a pep talk, showing him his book of women. And the hope there is that he'll realise that there are a lot of people to date. And he's only 16. He doesn't necessarily need to settle down right away. I think the message is great, but the way Sam went about it wasn't the best. But actually, it kind of had the opposite effect. And Anthony decides to marry Annie. Anthony is played by Timothy Williams. Annie is played by Mandy Ingber. And they decide to get married. And Carla gives them a challenge. If they can stay apart for 2 weeks and still want to get married, they can get married. She'll give them their blessing. And I thought that was a pretty reasonable thing to do. I guess the thinking behind it is that Carla hoped Anthony would become lonely, start looking at other girls, and realise that actually there are other fish in the sea. But things don't necessarily go that way, and they still decide to get married. And then Gabrielle, Annie's friend, played by Sherilyn Fenn, comes into Cheers to tell them to hurry up because she was waiting outside in the car. And Anthony displays a very Tortelli personality, as instantly his attention switches from his bride-to-be Annie to Gabrielle. And Carla kind of delights in the fact that her son is just like every other Tortelli man. Obviously, that's not something she necessarily wants, but because he's 16, she'd rather he had eyes for other women than getting married. And we have this really lovely moment where Annie and Carla are bonding over, I think, root beer, and they have compliments for each other, and it's pretty sweet, and I rather enjoyed it, and it's a really nice way to end the episode. It's a brilliant episode, very funny. Personal highlights would be Diane basically being Diane, and, well, Cliff being Cliff. I absolutely adored the quote on the phone with Cliff and the potato, and Diane's panicking and word vomiting ostensibly. It was all very well written, very well delivered. Oh, and something else I liked is when Woody asked Norm how he managed to drink so much beer, and Norm tells him it's because of mirrors. And I genuinely thought, what are you going on about? And then Norm explained he avoids mirrors, and I like that. I like that a lot. So definitely a really brilliant episode, a lot that made me very happy, very funny, and it's nice that we got to focus on a lot of different characters as well. It hasn't been the case relatively recently because mostly episodes have been about Sam and Diane and Frasier. A little bit of focus on Woody, but it's nice to get a good mix, a good variety here. All things considered, The Groom Wore Clearasil is a really great episode.